Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. Today we're going to dive into a heartwarming story of love, promises and unexpected twists, where one woman's dedication in the face of adversity keeps a promise made to someone she loves, while a dark betrayal unravels a decade of lies. Curious to see how everything unfolds? Stay tuned, and if you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. A fine rain falls softly over a small vegetable garden, the air cool and damp. Tu Tien kneels among the wilting greens, her hands caked in dirt, eyes red from the tears she's been holding back. "The soil is too poor," she murmurs, her voice strained. "When Jack comes back and sees this, he'll blame me for not taking care of the garden he planted." She shudders as a cold gust of wind brushes past her, mingling with her tears. Her phone buzzes in her pocket, and she pulls it out with trembling hands. It's a reminder about Jack's charity event with the Tan Min children. He was supposed to be there today, but he's still missing. She stares at the screen for a moment, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. Suddenly, she stands up abruptly, wiping the rain and tears from her cheeks. Her expression hardens with determination. "No, I'll keep your promise for you," she whispers to herself. She rushes into the kitchen, pulling out flour, cassava and mung beans, her eyes lighting up with purpose. "Fried cakes and cassava cakes. The kids will love them," she says softly, almost to herself. Without a second thought, her hands move quickly to dig up the cassava, the rain soaking her to the bone. Yet, a smile tugs at her lips as she whispers, "Jack would praise me so much if he saw this." In that moment, loneliness turns into fierce action. The small, flickering flame of love inside her burns brighter, even in the freezing rain. She's no longer waiting. She's taking action, keeping the promise Jack made to the children, ensuring that love won't be interrupted, not even for a day. Meanwhile, in a locked room, Toan sits smirking at the glass of water in front of an unconscious Jack. His fingers lightly stroke his hair as he speaks quietly to himself. 10 years, Jack. Finally, I stand above you." His voice is a whisper, barely audible in the room. "From now on, only me." The scene cuts back to Tu Tien, now back at home, her hands covered in flour as she pounds mung beans while softly humming the song Jack used to sing. Each round ball she forms, perfect and filled with love, carries her longing for him. The rain pours harder outside, but inside she moves with purpose. The soft sound of her humming fills the room, a quiet act of love. Each cake she carefully wraps, her hands steady despite the cold, is an act of devotion. "Jack, I'm doing this for you," she whispers, as the rain splashes against the windows. Two opposing worlds, one of fake greed and one of genuine love. As Tu Tien works in the kitchen frying the golden cakes with care, Toan is in a luxurious meeting room, sitting across from director Diep and engineer Luan. He smiles confidently, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "This project will be my turning point," he says with a sense of finality. Diep nods, impressed. Luan slides a file across the table, nodding in agreement. "I trust Mr. Toan will do well," Luan says, his tone professional. Toan raises his glass, his eyes full of the self-assuredness of someone who believes victory is already within his grasp. Meanwhile, outside, Tu Tien has wrapped nearly 100 cakes. She picks up the bamboo basket, hugging it close to her chest, and runs toward the motorbike. The rain stings her face, but the warmth in her heart keeps her going. As long as the children smile, it's enough, she says to herself, a quiet promise echoing in her heart. Two paths in the rain, one leading to empty glory, the other to love that's real, love that's pure. At that very moment, Toan is sitting across from director Diep and engineer Luan, poised to sign the biggest contract of his life. He's on the verge of achieving everything he's worked for. But then, the door to the meeting room bursts open and Officer Tu steps inside, his voice cold as ice. "Mr. Tuan, you're requested at headquarters," he says. "Charges of tax evasion and legal violations." Tuan freezes. His pen drops from his hand as his heart races. He looks up, his face pale. Behind Officer Tu stands Vin, holding a thick stack of evidence, and from the shadows, Jack steps forward, his eyes calm but sharp. Tuan stammers, his voice barely a whisper. You're alive?" The moment of triumph he's been holding on to for so long disappears in an instant. All that's left is the sound of handcuffs snapping shut and the ashen face of a man who once thought he was untouchable. Jack stands before the handcuffed Tuan, his voice unwavering. "Mai is my little sister, Tuan," he says, his gaze piercing through Tuan. "Blood sister, you've misunderstood for 10 years. You harmed me and my family all because of jealousy over a girl who never loved you." Tuan collapses to the floor, his tears finally flowing for the first time in a decade, tears of regret and shame. Jack hands the final dossier to Officer Tu, the evidence complete. Vin bows deeply. "Jack saved my family," he says, his voice filled with gratitude. "I could never harm him." Luan and Diep stand behind, silently nodding in agreement. The truth, at last, has come to light, and it cuts through Tuan's pride like a knife. Tu Tien sits under the eaves, surrounded by the children, the rain pouring down around them. Despite the storm, the children's laughter fills the air. She shares the last of the warm cakes, the scent filling the space, and as the rain continues to fall, she smiles softly, stroking a little girl's hair. "Next time, when Brother Jack comes back, he'll bring lots of gifts, okay?" she says, her voice tender. The children cheer, their faces bright with hope, despite the storm around them. And at that exact moment, Jack races through the slippery mountain roads, rain lashing against his face. His eyes are locked ahead, focused only on one thing, the farm where the woman he loves is waiting for him. Two hearts racing toward each other through the storm, driven by love, by hope, and by promises made. The rain continues to pour as Tu Tien turns around to say goodbye to the children. She stops in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat as she sees the familiar figure standing in the rain, soaked to the bone. It's Jack. No words are exchanged. The sound of the rain falling around them is the only thing that fills the air. Jack runs to her, pulling her into his arms, his warmth enveloping her. The cold, the rain, none of it matters now. Tu Tien bursts into tears in his embrace, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Jack kisses her hair softly, his voice filled with quiet assurance. "Never again will I let anyone separate us." As the rain falls around them, their faces shine with the warmth of love. The storm outside is nothing compared to the warmth that fills their hearts, a love that has endured despite the trials, despite the misunderstandings, and despite the years apart. After days of separation, they are finally together, completely, forever. In a small, rainy village, Tu Tien is determined to keep a promise to her missing partner, Jack, by preparing homemade cakes for the children he had promised to help. Despite her struggles, she perseveres, baking with love and devotion. Meanwhile, Jack's rival, Toan, has spent years plotting his rise, but his victory is short-lived when the truth about his betrayal comes to light. As Jack reappears, Toan's world crumbles, and the truth behind a decade of deception is revealed. In a poignant moment, Tu Tien and Jack reunite after years apart, their love stronger than ever. Through rain, lies, and hardships, the story showcases the power of love, promises, and redemption, proving that even in the darkest moments, love will find its way.